senior publisher at Elsevier, managing portfolio of health and medicine. Prior to that, I had previous roles at Elsevier and another publishers, and also had a role in ethics, accompanied by my colleague Angela Wellish, our learning manager and development manager at Research and Integrity Ethics of Center of Expertise at Elsevier. Now, I imagine you are probably well-versed in matters of plagiarism. You might have also attended workshops or lectures about using Turnitin to check essays during your coursework. You might have also awareness of paper mills. If not, no worries. I'll be covering this in later part of this presentation. And of course, unethical actions like deliberate breaches of publishing ethics or scientific conduct. However, today, we want to focus on the common mistakes made by sincere researchers and how you can steer clear of them. So without any more delay, let's jump right into the 10th pitfall, the absence of proper ethical consent documentation. When planning your research and then drafting your study, there are quite a few important things to include. And these need particular care for those of you working with human participants or animal subjects. First of all, just make sure you list your materials and also where the country of origin and more details that will allow reviewers, editors, and even readers to replicate these studies at later points or verify them. If you have the data and you're allowed to share them in part or completely on other databases, or how they are governed by other repositories or your institutions, this needs to be mentioned. Protocols and IRB approvals, trial registration, patient consent to study, and publication. Then we have the authorship and the authorship order, the affiliations and funding, credit, which basically mentions the contribution of each author in the study. And of course, any international committee medical journal editor statements that authors need to keep in consideration, conflict of interest, and declaration statements. As for the copyright permission, make sure at all time you have the permission to include figures and tables for reproduction purposes in your article. And peer review, Bahar has extensively spoken about this, but it's worth mentioning that you provide anonymized files for peer review purposes that would not jeopardize patient if that is included in your study. And always make sure you check the journal guide for authors to review any specific requirements around inclusion of ethical statements, criterion for authorship, and conflict of interest. There's a lot to think about here, but there are resources to make this easier. Now, let's talk about reporting guidelines, and one of them is Equator, short of enhancing the quality and transparency of health research, which reports guidelines are a set of standards and recommendations designed to improve the quality and transparency of research reporting in the field of health and biomedical sciences. These guidelines provide researchers, authors, and journal editors with structured frameworks for reporting research methods and findings accurately and comprehensively. By adhering to Equator guidelines, researchers can enhance the rigor and reproducibility of their studies, ultimately promoting the credibility and reliability of health research publications. Bear in mind, policies may vary from journal to journal, but we expect that human and animal experiments follow applicable ethics standards. These standards include compliance with the Helsinki Agreement and ARRIVE guidelines for human and animal experiments, respectively, as well as adhering to local legal regulation. Additionally, approval from an ethics committee local to where investigation takes place is required. Ensure that these approvals are in place not just for publication, but suitability in time for recruitment and commencement of the study. Now, along with the ethical statement, people can also trip up when making appropriate declaration around conflict of interest. Now, a conflict of interest or competing interest is a set of conditions in which professional judgment concerning a primary interest, such as the validity of the research, may be influenced by a secondary interest, such as financial gain. Declaration of interest or disclosure statement is a statement from the author that there is no financial personal interest or belief that could affect the objectivity, or if there is, stating as the source and nature of that potential conflict of interest. Now, reviewers and other editors must also disclose any conflict of interest, such as they are coming from the same institution, prior working relationship, or co-authorship. How we do it at Elsevier or facilitate this for our authors, many Elsevier journals use our declaration tool to help authors step by step go through the process of preparing well-considered an ICA-GME compliant declaration. It helps authors, let me move this. It helps authors disclose any potential conflict of interest, such as financial or non-financial research support, recent relationships such as advisory positions or consultation, or relevant patents or IP rights. It is important to say that potential conflict of interest do not necessarily prohibit publication. It often doesn't. Rather, it is important to be transparent about them so that the journal editor, reviewers, and readers can be aware of whether any undue bias may have affected the impartiality of your conclusions. So be honest with these. Now, conflict of interest can take many forms. So I wonder if any can tell me, as a show of hands, who thinks that these would comprise or be a conflict of interest. A university researcher who owns a stock in a large oil company conducts an experiment on the environmental effects of oil drilling. A researcher submits an article to a journal for which an editor-in-chief is a professor in the researcher's department. A doctor who abides by traditional healing procedures writes a paper on emerging current medical technologies. I see, Angela, you raised a hand.
I just hit the wrong button. I'm sorry.
No worries. So anyone who would like to raise a hand or just let us know in the chat if you have any thoughts on whether any of these or all comprise a conflict of interest. Okay, we have Natalia. Good. Natalia, if you would like to speak up, let us know and we will allow you to speak. Okay. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to say that Natalia, you're right. And everyone who just was trying to raise his hand, actually all these could be conflict of interest. But as long as you're honest about them, declare them and allow the editor and reviewer to assess whether it's likely that it has unduly influenced the work, and it may not be a problem at all. Now, we come to the first poll of questions today. So over to you, Angela, to launch the poll.
Okay, so hopefully you can see this on your screen now. But we'd like to ask you who should be considered as an author of a research paper. This next set of slides will dig into authorship a little bit more. I'll keep the poll open for a little bit longer. I don't see any other questions that have come through to answer in the meantime, but I see results coming in. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad that this is working in our favor today, technology. So we are nearly there, and I'm seeing a consensus. So in the interest of time, I'm going to end the poll, and hopefully you can now see these results come up on your screen. I'm seeing Shalimar nod, so I'm hoping everybody else can see that as well. But the majority of you are correct in that it's individuals who've made a substantial contribution to the paper, to the research that's been done, and that they've participated in drafting and revising the manuscript. Anybody who's just kind of contributed to the idea of the project be perfect for the acknowledgement section. Generally, only the principal investigator or the lead project, project leader, they've maybe sponsored the project, they've maybe have had a really critical input into it, but I'm sure that most research takes more than just one individual to have actually completed all the research and the analysis and then that drafting and reviewing of the paper. So I'll stop sharing this and turn it back over to Shalimar, who will dig into authorship a bit more.
Thanks, Angela. Great results. It's good to see that actually 74% got this. And for those who didn't know, worries, I hope we will be able to just establish the concept and make it clearer for you. Now, you might have a clear idea of where you believe you should be positioned on the author list of your paper, but your supervisor or collaborators might have different perspectives. It's crucial to establish well in advance of submitting your article for publication, the authorship order. But how do you go about making this decision? Let's consider a scenario. A researcher has completed her paper, and the question arises, who should be credited as an author? Should it be the advisor or professor from a different institute, the lab assistant, or her fellow student who helped her proofread the work? Now, in most cases, we would expect that only the researcher and her advisor would qualify as an author. However, the reality is not always that straightforward. Fortunately, there are established guidelines to help you navigate these complexities. Now, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors recommend authorship based on meeting all 4 criteria below: substantial contribution to the conception and design or acquisition of data or analysis and interpretation of data. Secondly, draft the article or revise it critically for important intellectual content. Give their approval of the final version to be published. And finally, agree to be held accountable for all aspects of the work, ensuring all research integrity questions are investigated and resolved. So, including individuals as authors who do not meet the fundamental authorship criteria constitutes a breach of ethical policy. An individual should only be considered an author if they have reviewed and given their final approval to the version of the manuscript that is being submitted. Additionally, they should be willing and able to take public responsibility for the content of the article if necessary. Authorship should not be granted as a favor to assist a colleague or student, and it should absolutely not be acquired through any form of payment. Furthermore, it is important to note that disagreements among you and your colleagues during the submission process or after publication can lead to various complications. These may include delays in getting your work published, expression of concerns regarding the research, or the need for corrections that could impact the reputation of authors. Therefore, it is essential to carefully consider and ensure that everyone involved agrees before submitting the paper. And now over to you, Angela, to launch another poll.
Okay. So what can you do proactively, to be able to prevent these authorship disputes? You should see a poll come up now. So should you avoid listing any other authors? Should you clearly define that criteria and contributions at the project's outset? Include all colleagues as a way to maintain a harmonious relationship with everyone? or exclude junior researchers to minimize conflicts? Answers are coming in feverishly. Fantastic. And again, I'm starting to see a trend here. So I'm going to end this poll and share the results across. And so as you can see, right, and as Shalimar just mentioned, it's really critical that you all work with your fellow co-authors to define what that authorship criteria should be and whose contributions are going to come in at the different stages of publication at the project's outset. This is the best way to protect yourself and to really reduce that element of dispute that's coming down later on. All right, I will stop sharing that, Shalimar, and you can continue on.
Thank you so much, Angela. And now, all right, now we're going to move on to pitfall number 7 that involves compliance with generative artificial intelligence policies. This is relatively new policy, considering the significant advancement made in this field recently. I'd like to start by emphasizing that ChatGPT cannot be credited as an author and cannot assume responsibility for the work. While generative AI can play a role in drafting your manuscript, it is essential to exercise caution in its use. As you can see, we had an experimentation, a brave one, by one of the authors who in nurse education and practice, who then listed ChatGPT as an author. But afterwards, Elsevier released a policy in response that ChatGPT cannot be listed as a co-author in any way, and the use of ChatGPT has been also limited, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it later on. So just so you know, this article has been corrected, and a corrigendum has been issued in effect as well. All right, with regards to the writing process, generative AI can only be used to improve the readability and language of the work, and it must be used with human oversight, as it often generates text that it sounds correct, but it's rife with inaccuracies. If you do use generative AI, it should be clearly noted in your manuscript and not as an author. You can use generative AI to support data analysis. Do check your chosen journal policies, however, before submitting. And you're more than welcome also to check policies published on Elsevier ethics page to get general information about it, but also note publishers and journals have different policies, or they could differ a little bit. Now, these tools cannot be used to create or alter images, either to represent experimental data, cover images, or graphical abstracts, with the only exception being where AI-assisted technology is used to generate or interpret the underlying data, such as in biomedical imaging, and this would need to be clearly described in the methodology. AI cannot be used to generate journal cover or graphical abstract. Even if you were to ask ChatGPT to create a new image for you, we cannot verify that it's not under copyright elsewhere. Authors should explain how the AI or AI-assisted tools were used in the image creation or alteration process, and the name of the model or tool, version and extension numbers, and the manufacturer. Authors should also adhere to the AI software-specific usage policies and ensure correct content attribution. Where applicable, authors could be asked to provide pre-AI adjusted versions of images and/or composite raw images used to create the final submitted versions for editorial assessment. This brings us to pitfall 6 on our countdown, image manipulation. There are legitimate ways to modify images used in your figures. For instance, in case of Western blot, it is perfectly acceptable to make adjustment to the brightness, contrast, or color balance to enhance clarity. However, these changes must be uniformly applied to the entire image and not just to obscure or eliminate any information present in the original. It is important to note that altering brightness or contrast to conceal bands or artifacts is not allowed. Selectively removing features from an image, as seen as an example 2, with the blurred band, or splicing and adding features from a different image or using image alteration to conceal them, is also prohibited. Only make modification that is necessary for the sake of clarity. Now, keep in mind that we employ image forensic tool to identify irregularities and duplication within figures. So resist the temptation to enhance your data for cosmetics purposes. Now back to you, Angela, for another poll.
Excellent. So that was a great lead in to this idea of data falsification. So I will launch this poll now. You should see that up on your screen. Which of the following best describes data falsification in research? Is it if you've accidentally misinterpreted the data, if you've manipulated the data to achieve desired results, if you've used the data from a reliable source, or if you've published raw and processed data? Give it a few more minutes, a few more seconds here. I think we have our clear trend here. So I will share those results. And the majority of you are correct, right? Manipulating the data to achieve those desired results is the spot on definition of what data falsification actually is. If you've made a mistake, as occasionally happens, generally, you know, you're the kind authors that are coming back to us, coming back to our editors and saying, "Ooh, I've made a miscalculation on this," and being able to be a little bit more truthful and forthcoming with it. And we typically can issue the appropriate corrections to the paper at that point. But when you're doing any sort of manipulation to the data to really skew a result in the direction that you're desiring, that's when we've got a bigger set of problems. So Shalimar, back over to you to dig into that and show some examples.
Thank you so much, Angela. Fantastic. All right. While we discussed instances of AI misuse leading to fabricated results in image form, data manipulation encompasses a broader spectrum of unethical practices. It ranges from tampering with data sets in Excel to skewing results in favor of certain hypotheses, to falsifying error bars and statistical analysis. This unethical conduct undermines the integrity of scientific research and can have significant negative repercussions for both the scientific community and society as a whole. A compelling illustration of these consequences comes from Andrew Wakefield MMR vaccine study in 1998. This study falsely asserted a link between the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and autism, resulting in decline in vaccination rates and subsequent outbreaks of preventable diseases. This put the health of many individuals, particularly children, in jeopardy. This cumulative impact of such data falsification cases erodes trust in science and academia, institutions built upon the pillars of truth, integrity, and unbiased research. This erosions of trust can lead to public skepticism, ultimately undermining the credibility of experts and the validity of scientific findings. Our next one focuses on plagiarism and textual overlap. I'm sure most of you would easily associate literal copying or verbatim copying as plagiarism. What about text recycling or self-plagiarism or paraphrasing? While paraphrasing and text recycling might seem innocent, there are compelling reasons why we are discouraging those practices, even when authors are drawing from their own work. The responsibility of researchers is to bring new and innovative ideas to their fields, promoting originality and creativity. Reusing content without adding new dimensions can reduce the impact of their work. Unacknowledged reuse can mislead readers into thinking ideas are novel and compromising the integrity of scholarly work. Incorrect citations from reused content can harm a work's credibility. Upholding academic integrity demands transparently crediting the origins of ideas. Text recycling might create an unfair advantages, making authors seem more influential. Journals' anti-self-plagiarism policies can result in rejections or retraction. Duplicating content without development offers limited contributions. And repurposed text without fresh insights hinders the advancement of knowledge exchange and idea sharing. When evaluating suspected plagiarism, two key factors come into play. Did the author acknowledge the prior work? And whereas overlap is substantial, that is making judgment call on the quantity and quality of the overlap. With a show of hand, who thinks it is acceptable to reuse your own prior text in the methods section? 2 versus results, discussion or conclusions sections. Anyone? Now, while it's up to the editor's discretion, the methods section is likely the one section in which textual overlap is more tolerated, provided you clearly reference the original article. Overlap in the results, discussions, or conclusions are less accepted. It might suggest a lack of originality or novelty with the work presented in the paper at hand. Many editors would also argue that the introduction should also contain minimal overlap with earlier works, as the introduction is meant to set the scene for this current body of research. That is, what gaps were filled in this paper comparative to prior approaches. Now, similar to Turnitin used in the academic setting, all submissions to Elsevier journals are run through Authenticate. Editors can review the similarity check reports, which compares text in your manuscript to other publication websites, and color codes any section of your text which have matched to other sources. We utilize these reports to help gauge quantity and the quality of the overlap. Now, editors don't rely solely on the numbers, but they also look where the overlap is found. For example, as we've said earlier, if it's found in the results or discussion section, it's less acceptable. And in most cases, the paper is sent back to authors for clarification or revision. Whereas it could be less of a concern if it's found in the methodology. Now, we are talking about language editing services. If English is not your first language, it is very important to ensure edits made do not change the underlying meaning of your article or conclusions or methodologies. This also includes, as we stated earlier, the generative AI language editing or paraphrasing tools, bots, which sometimes can introduce nonsensical phrases. So make sure to put this into account, take this into account. Now we're going to talk about multiple or concurrent publications. Basically, this manuscript describes essentially the same research, and they are published in more than one journal simultaneously. Duplication of the same paper in multiple journals of different languages is also not allowed. If you are an author and you feel that you would serve another community or another journals, then please make sure you cite the original source and mention that in the footnote of your article. Salami slicing is another unaccepted practice where several publications are created from the same research, but what is done is that the authors could often slice the results or conclusions they found into different articles. So to save time, there's a question, sorry, to the left. Can you submit your paper to more than journal in parallel? So no, this violates our ethic policies and is not acceptable. So please refrain from doing so. Wait until the final outcome is made to your article before submitting to another journal. What if you share your paper on a preprint server? Would that be considered duplicate publication? The answer is no. Elsevier allows responsible sharing on preprint servers. All right, before we move on to this section, I believe there is another poll, Angela.
We have one after on this one, Shalimar.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Sometimes when concerns, let's see here. Sometimes when concerns of paraphrasing or plagiarism are arised with authors for whom English is not their native, they express admiration of the eloquence of originating authors. Sorry, this is a different one. I think this is Angela. This is actually, I wanted to ask you how many red flags you see this in the revision decision letter sent to an author. I want you to take a minute just to look at it. And if you can in the chat, mention if you see anything of concern. Okay, I'm gonna go through this. While citation manipulation on the part of the author that is adding every paper you have ever published into every reference list would counter the well-intentioned premises of the countdown. It is true that well-intentioned researcher may be put into unethical situations, such as example presented here. Show of hands, how many of you see red flags? Don't see any red flags? 1 red flag, 2 flags, 3 or more. Just raise your hand. If you don't, I've already marked those. In this example, good, thanks, Andre. In this example, we've highlighted 4 red flags from both the reviewer and editor-in-chief of this anonymized journal that we're referring here as ABCD. The blue box demonstrates citation stacking. In this case, the reviewer recommends a series of publications, likely for which you will find the reviewer is a co-author, but in some other cases are papers published by that reviewer's network. A second red flag is the generic mention reference to leading papers without indicating specifically why the referee feels that works should be included, and without indicating, for example, why lack of inclusion would present a problem, and at which specific instance in the paper. If you were to add all of these manuscripts without justification at the time of revision, you could be implicated in citation stuffing or adding citation in masses at the time of revision. The third red flag, citation coercion, comes from the part of the editor in implying that the reference must be included in order for your article to be considered for publication. Our general policy is that editors should not alter referee comments. However, they should provide clarification in their decision letters as to which of the recommendations should be taken under consideration. In this scenario, the editor should indicate that authors may review the suggested references, however, are not obligated to add unless they agree with the relevance. The fourth red flag here presents a second type of citation stacking, in which the editor and reviewer might be working together to artificially inflate the impact factor of the journal, given that the last four references are all papers published in the journal at hand. So, as an author, what are your rights? Are you required to add in these references? No. If you suspect editor-reviewer collision, you can flag this with the journal manager, who can help to escalate to the publisher of the journal or for a formal investigation. For a formal investigation to start. Okay. And now back to you, Angela.
Sure. So I think, Shalimar, you've just kind of really nicely gone through all of these citation manipulation definitions that we just wanted to make sure that everybody had as a reference point from the author perspective, right? I think there was even a question in the last session of, how many references can you add in and should you add in of your own work? And I think it's really making sure that that work is appropriate to the research that you're presenting within that paper. So be aware that you're trying to fill the gaps in knowledge. Only cite your prior work where it actually helps to build on that knowledge and provide the additional context that you need to set the scene for the current body of research. Shalimar, if you want to move forward one more slide, then I think we come to the next poll.
Okay. So while citation manipulation on the part of the author, which we have expanded on it, I would like now to be clear that all of these definitions are not to say that you can't reference your own work or add unintentionally missed references published in the journal or suggested by the referee at the time of revision. However, what we're saying, it's your responsibility to have read those papers and made a scientific judgment that they do support your research methodologies, help to draw conclusions, or highlight advancement of your research over prior studies. And now one of the common, what authors need to be aware of is what we call predatory journals or ungenuine journals. And we always recommend authors to do their research before they submit to any journal. Please make sure you investigate it properly. Go to their website and check their journal name, and whether it is associated with an ISSN. Each journal out there is associated with a unique number. It's a serial number, and accredited journal or genuine journal have real ISSNs, or most of the time. So make sure it has one, and you can review it and make sure it is available by searching on the ISSN portal, that there is clear description of the peer review process. Who owns the journal? Who manages the journal? Is there an editorial contact or information? Is there a mention to the author fee? And how do they manage the process of research misconduct? Is there any form of direct marketing and how it goes? So please make sure that you check those. One of the most commonly co-occurring features is hidden or unclear author fees, and the lack of quality peer review of articles of expert in the field. And most quite often, there's a guarantee of acceptance. And what we always do is that we cannot guarantee the acceptance of your paper. Your paper will go to peer review but there's no way for the editor to assure authors that it will get acceptance. But in most cases, predatory journals, normally what they will do is that they will market for a guaranteed acceptance and an expedited or a very fast publication times, normally within a week or 48 hours, and they keep pushing for the authors to pay for a fee. Angela, would you like to add anything here?
Nope, I think you're good to move on. And I think we have a poll coming up.
Yes.
Perfect. So I will launch this last poll for us here. Hopefully you can see that now on screen. I'm talking a little bit about paper mills. So what are paper mills in the context of academic publishing? Are they organizations that produce high quality paper for printing of our research articles? Are they services that provide free research assistance to authors? Are they companies that manufacture printing paper, or are they entities that produce and sell pre-written academic papers for submission? And while I am giving that another few seconds, we did have a question that came through earlier relating to the similarity percentage. This is pertaining back to those Authenticate reports, checking for textual overlap. And so we have a question that says, what is the accepted similarity percentage by Elsevier's journal? And I would say what we actually recommend for our editors is to not necessarily pay attention to a specific number or have a bar set for a specific percentage that is allowed or not allowed, but rather we actually look at and scroll through the whole paper to see where we're finding those instances of textual overlap. Are they occurring in the materials and methods, depending on the area of research that may be more acceptable? Because, you know, coming from a cell biology world, there's only so many ways I could rephrase the same methodology to say, I rinse the cells so many times. And I can imagine there's other examples that go beyond just the biology discipline on that side of things. So we do recommend that editors actually go through those reports on a more detailed basis, and again, gauge that quantity and quality of overlap within those reports. So this one is interesting on our poll here. I'm going to end it, but it seems like we don't necessarily have a great consensus. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll at least have learned a little bit about what paper mills are. So 44% of you wound up getting this correct. It is answer D. Paper mills are entities. They're kind of companies that have come about that produce and sell academic papers or authorship positions on those papers. And so Shalimar, I'll turn it back over to you to provide a little bit more context around paper mills.
Thank you so much, Angela. Now, paper mills are not actually, is not a new, let's say, concept. It has been out there, but we recently have been able to spot these nowadays with the advancement of our tools, and also, let's say, seeing the trends. And allow me to now just expand on this topic to make sure you have better understanding of it. So paper mills are professional companies that offer publishing services to authors, usually for a fee. Now, here's how they typically operate. Submission impersonation. They start by impersonating a corresponding author using a central email address. They submit a paper to a journal, and this paper can contain either genuine research data or fabricated information. Now, peer review solicitation. Once the paper is in the peer review process, they reach out to individuals, often through social media and targeted email campaigns, to solicit authorship positions on the paper. These positions may come with different prices points for each author. They essentially sell authorship. Or it could happen through a revised submission. So after securing these authorship positions, they submit a revised version of the paper with newly added author. This revised paper now includes individuals who may have had no actual involvement in the research. And then we have manipulation of special issues. In some cases, paper mills may also pay editors or guest editors to submit special issue proposals This gives them control over the use of fake reviewers to submit reviewer reports, essentially controlling the peer review process. They can manipulate these reports to push their papers through acceptance. The key point here to understand that that paper mills engage in unethical practices that compromise the integrity of the scientific publishing process. And these organizations profit from selling authorship positions and often resort to deception to get their papers published. Young authors should be cautious and avoid any involvement with such unethical practices to maintain the credibility of their research and the scientific community as a whole. So now we would be remiss in discussing these ethical pitfalls without also provide a warning on the potential consequences. Before we move to your questions, it is due to scientific community to initiate corrections to the scientific record. When honest minor mistakes have been identified, we will issue an erratum. If the error was introduced by Elsevier, for example, at the typesetting stage, or a corrigendum if the error was introduced by the authors and does not change the underlying results or conclusion drawn. Most of the ethical violation discussed today would result in a retraction of the paper. Note that this doesn't mean your paper will be removed from the search platforms, but rather when authors open the file, they will see the retraction notice indicating the outcome of the investigation. The PDF also remains online, but with a retraction watermark issued on each page. Additionally, depending on the severity and type of case, including, for example, some authorship dispute, we may need to notify the institution and/or funding sources for assistance or awareness. And for more serious infractions, you may no longer be considered eligible to serve an editorial board or as a reviewers. We had cases where authors were, for example, forging ethical approvals for their studies, and that's very serious. And such practices prohibited them from acting as editorial board or even reviewers on journals. So hopefully, though, you will leave this session having learned a few tips for safeguarding the integrity of your work from research onset to publication. Together, we can protect the scientific record and ensure that the research cycle builds upon validated and trustworthy work. Here are a few resources. We are including them that we discussed throughout the presentation, and to provide also more resources on AI, for example. And thank you for your time, and I think we will open the floor for questions if there's any.